Take off the veil." The man stared at the scar across her face, a mark from fire 20 years old. Everyone said it made her ugly, but he smiled. "Gold is soft and useless up here. Iron survives, and you have an iron scar." This is the story of the unwanted daughter who became the queen of the valley. The fire in the stone hearth crackled with the voice of old timber remembering its youth. Outside the windows of the Blackwood Ranch House, Wyoming stretched into the June darkness of 1920, vast and indifferent as it had always been. Young Thomas Blackwood sat cross-legged on the Navajo rug, 16 years old and restless with the kind of energy that made sitting still feel like punishment. But tonight he sat. Tonight his grandfather was finally talking. Caleb Blackwood was 94 years old. His hands rested on the arms of his chair like maps of violence, the knuckles swollen and healed wrong, the left palm marked by a half-moon scar where a knife had gone clean through. Thomas had traced these scars since he was small, the way other boys traced coastlines and atlases, but he had never asked. In the Blackwood house you did not ask about scars. You waited until the stories came on their own. The telegram lay on the side table, yellow paper already creased from Caleb's reading and rereading. Thomas had seen it earlier. His Aunt Sarah was getting married to a man the family said was wrong for her, a ranch hand with no property, no prospects, no standing, the kind of match that made people whisper in church. "Why did you let Aunt Sarah marry him?" Thomas asked. The question came out younger than he wanted, almost petulant. "Everyone says it's wrong. Dad says he's not good enough." Caleb's eyes still sharp, despite their clouding fixed on the photograph hanging above the mantel. The woman in the frame was perhaps 30, her hair pulled back severe, her face turned 3/4 to the camera. Even in the faded sepia, the scar marking her neck was unmistakable, a legacy of fire that she wore without shame. She looked directly at the lens with an expression that was neither smile nor frown, but something harder, something earned. "Because 42 years ago," Caleb said, his voice still carrying the gravel of command despite his age, "I learned that love doesn't ask permission, and the woman in that photograph taught me that scars don't make you broken, they make you iron." Thomas looked at the photograph, then back at his grandfather. The old man's hand had moved to rest on the Winchester rifle mounted on the wall beside his chair, model 1873. Thomas had held it before, knew the weight of it, the wear on the stock. Carved into the wood near the trigger guard were initials GB. "Grandmother Grace," Thomas said. "Your grandmother Grace," Caleb confirmed. "Grace Harper before she became Grace Blackwood, before she became the queen of this valley, before she taught a broken soldier what redemption actually costs." The fire popped. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed 9. "This is her story," Caleb said, "and mine. And it starts on a night colder than any you've ever known in the winter of 1878, when a father sold his daughter to pay a gambling debt, and a man who thought he deserved to die alone learned that some debts can only be paid forward." Caleb's eyes closed. When he opened them again, they were looking at something 42 years distant. "It starts," he said, "with the unwanted daughter." December 1878. Bitter Creek, Wyoming territory. The Harper homestead crouched in the valley like something ashamed of itself, a collection of weathered planks and failing hope. Inside, the air smelled of old smoke and older desperation. Grace Harper stood at the wash basin, her hands submerged in water so cold it had gone past pain into a kind of numb burning. The cast-iron skillet she was scrubbing had been caked with grease since morning, and her father had not bought soap in 3 months. She was 26 years old. By the standards of Bitter Creek, this made her a spinster. By the standards of her father, this made her a failure. The door banged open. Warren Harper stumbled inside on a gust of December wind and whiskey fumes, his coat hanging open, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. Behind him came the sound of his horse left unsaddled in the yard, because even the animal knew better than to expect care from this man. "Where is she?" Warren's voice filled the room with the particular volume of the drunk trying to sound sober. "Where's Rosalind?" "In bed." Grace kept scrubbing. Her hands were raw. The scar tissue that ran from her left ear down across her throat and over her collarbone had tightened in the cold, pulling at the skin. "It's past 9. Wake her." "Father, she's sleeping." Warren crossed the room in 3 unsteady steps and backhanded the skillet from Grace's hands. It hit the floor with a clang that would wake Rosalind anyway, that would wake half the valley if the valley cared to listen. Grace did not flinch. She had learned over 20 years of this, that flinching only made it worse. "I said wake her." From the loft came the sound of movement. Rosalind appeared at the top of the ladder in her nightgown, 23 years old and beautiful in the way that made men stupid. Corn silk hair, summer sky eyes, the kind of beauty that was a currency all its own, especially out here where currency was scarce. "Papa." Her voice was sleep-soft, deliberately so. Rosalind knew how to use her voice the way other women used weapons. "What's wrong?" Warren swayed. For a moment Grace thought he might fall, might spare them all whatever came next by simply passing out on the floor. But he steadied himself against the table, and when he looked up, his face carried an expression Grace had seen before. The look of a man who had found a way out, no matter the cost. "There's a debt," Warren said, "to the man on the mountain." Rosalind descended the ladder. She moved like water, effortless. "What man?" "Blackwood. Caleb Blackwood. Lives up on the ridge past the pine breaks." Warren wiped his mouth. "I owed him $300. Lost it at poker in Cheyenne. He said he'd take payment in other ways." The room went very quiet. Outside, the December wind tested the walls. "What kind of payment?" Rosalind's voice had lost its softness. Warren pulled a folded paper from his coat. His hands shook as he spread it on the table. "A daughter. A daughter of the Harper lineage, that's what it says. 1 daughter to settle the debt in full." Grace felt something cold settle in her stomach, colder even than the wash basin water. She looked at her father's face and saw the calculation there, saw the decision already made. "You can't mean me," Rosalind said. She had gone pale, the color draining from her cheeks in a way that somehow made her more beautiful, like a figure painted in snow. "Papa, everyone says he's a monster. They say he killed 3 men in Deadwood. They say he eats raw meat and sleeps on wolf pelts and hasn't spoken to another soul in 15 years. The contract doesn't specify which daughter." Warren looked at Grace for the first time since entering. His eyes traveled over her face, over the scar that marked her, over the plain features that had disappointed him every day since her mother's death. "It just says a daughter of the Harper lineage." The words hung in the air like smoke. Grace set down the rag she had been holding. Her hands were steady. They were always steady, even when her father's were not. "He'll know. He must have seen Rosalind in town. Everyone has seen Rosalind. When he lifts the veil and sees me instead, he'll send me back. Or kill me." "Maybe." Warren shrugged, and in that shrug was every year of Grace's life distilled into a single gesture of paternal indifference. "But that's his problem then, isn't it? The debt will be paid. Contract fulfilled. If he doesn't like the merchandise, he can take it up with God." Rosalind laughed. It was a high, bright sound, the kind of laugh that belonged at parties, not in rooms where fathers sold their daughters. "Send the ugly one to the beast. It's almost poetic, like a fairy tale, except the ugly duckling doesn't turn into a swan. She just gets eaten." Grace looked at her sister. They had shared a room until Rosalind was 10. Grace used to braid her hair, used to tell her stories, used to believe in the way that children believe impossible things, that one day Rosalind would remember this and love her for it. "At least I'll finally be useful," Grace said. Warren turned away, already moving on to the next problem, the next bottle. "Pack your things. He's sending a wagon at dawn." "What things?" Grace asked. "I own 2 dresses and a pair of boots." "Then pack those. And for God's sake, cover that." He gestured vaguely at her scar. "Maybe if he doesn't see it right away, he'll keep you long enough for the contract to stick." Rosalind climbed back up to the loft, humming. The sound drifted down like snowlight and unconcerned. Warren found his whiskey bottle and took it outside to sit with his unsaddled horse. And Grace stood in the empty kitchen, her hands dripping dishwater onto the floor, and thought about her mother. The fire had happened when Grace was 6. A grease spill, a spark, a sudden wall of flame between her and the door. Her mother had run through it to pull Grace out, had smothered the burning fabric of Grace's dress with her own body. The doctors saved Grace's life. The burns on her mother's lungs killed her 3 days later. "I'm sorry," Grace had whispered at the funeral, small and bandaged, and not understanding that sorry was a word too small for what had happened. Her father had looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the fire. "Your mother died for you," he said. "You better make sure it was worth it." 20 years later, Grace was still trying. She climbed to the loft, moving quietly past Rosalind's sleeping form. The locket waited in her hiding place, wrapped in cloth beneath the floorboards. It had been her mother's. Inside was a curl of dark hair and a strip of paper, the ink faded but still legible. "Strength is choosing to stand when they expect you to kneel." Grace put the locket around her neck. It was the only thing she owned that Warren had never thought to take because he had never thought to look. Invisible things stayed invisible even when they were made of gold. She packed the rest in silence. 2 dresses, 1 pair of boots. The small knife she used for kitchen work slipped into the boot where it would not be seen. And the Bible that had belonged to her grandfather, the judge, with his notes in the margins about law and precedent and the difference between justice and revenge. When dawn came, Grace was ready. She had not slept. Sleep was a luxury for people who believed tomorrow might be better than today, and Grace had stopped believing that a long time ago. But she had not stopped standing. The wagon arrived with the winter sun pale and distant behind the pine brakes. The man driving it was not what Grace expected. He was black, perhaps 50 years old, with shoulders that suggested a lifetime of hard work and eyes that suggested a lifetime of harder wisdom. He did not speak. When Grace approached with her small bundle of possessions, he simply nodded and gestured to the bench beside him. Warren came out to watch her go. He did not help her into the wagon. He did not say goodbye. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and his face set in an expression that might have been regret on a different man, but on Warren Harper was just relief. "Don't come back," he said. Grace looked at him. "I wasn't planning to." The driver flicked the reins. The horses, massive draft animals built for mountain work, leaned into their traces. The wagon lurched forward, and Bitter Creek began to fall away behind them. They traveled in silence. The driver occasionally glanced at Grace, but made no attempt at conversation. After the first hour, Grace realized why. When they stopped to rest the horses, he pulled a slate and chalk from beneath the seat and wrote in careful letters, "My name is Samuel Bridger. I cannot speak." "My name is Grace Harper," she said aloud, and then, because it seemed important, she took the chalk and wrote beneath his words, "Thank you for the kindness of silence." Samuel's face creased into something that might have been a smile. He wiped the slate clean and wrote, "You will need more than kindness where we are going." The journey took 6 hours. The land changed as they climbed the scrub plains, giving way to pine forest, the air thinning and sharpening in the lungs. The trail was barely a trail, more a suggestion worn into the mountainside by the passage of wagon wheels and determination. On either side, the trees pressed close, their branches heavy with snow that had not seen sun in weeks. Grace pulled her shawl tighter. The cold up here was different from the cold in the valley. It had teeth. They passed the carcasses of 3 wolves, shot and left where they fell. The blood in the snow was still red, still fresh. Grace pointed. Samuel nodded and gestured up the mountain. Message received. The man they were going to meet had done this. Recently. The cabin appeared as the sun touched the western peaks. It was not a cabin so much as a fortress built from timber so thick it could withstand avalanche or siege. The windows were narrow, the door reinforced with iron. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, gray against the darkening sky. Samuel brought the wagon to a halt 50 yards out. He did not move closer. He wrote on his slate, "He will come out or he will not. We wait." They waited. Grace studied the cabin. She had expected squalor, the den of a madman or a hermit. Instead, she saw care. The wood was chinked properly against the wind. The roof was sound. A small shed stood to one side and she could hear animals inside. Chickens, perhaps. A milk cow. Signs of a man who intended to survive, not just exist. The door opened. The man who emerged was tall, perhaps 6'2", with shoulders that filled the doorframe. He wore buckskin trousers and a flannel shirt, both clean despite the remoteness of his location. His hair was long and tied back more silver than black, and his beard was full and trimmed. A scar ran from his hairline down across his left cheek, the kind of mark left by a blade rather than a bullet. But it was his eyes that stopped Grace's breath. They were gray, the color of steel or winter sky, and they carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and remembered all of it. He looked at the wagon, at Samuel, at the small figure wrapped in shawls beside Samuel. Then he walked forward through the snow, moving with the controlled economy of someone who had learned not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. He stopped 10 feet from the wagon, his breath clouded in the cold. "Samuel!" His voice was deep, roughened by disuse, but still carrying the cadence of education, of command. Samuel nodded. The man's eyes moved to Grace. "And this is Warren Harper's payment." Grace felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. She had spent 26 years being looked at and found wanting. This was different. This was assessment without judgment, the way a blacksmith might assess iron before deciding whether to forge or discard it. "Get down," the man said. "You're letting the cold in." Grace climbed down from the wagon, careful in her movements, because the snow was deeper than it looked, and her boots were not made for this terrain. She stumbled slightly. The man did not reach out to steady her, but he did not step back either. Up close she could see more scars, burn marks on his hands, the knotted tissue of old bullet wounds through his shirt. He had been through fire, this man. Through war. Inside. He turned without waiting for her response and walked back toward the cabin. Grace looked at Samuel. Samuel made a gentle pushing gesture. "Go." She went. The interior was nothing like she expected. The cabin was warm, heated by both fireplaces, and the air smelled of pine smoke and leather and something cooking that made her stomach clench with hunger. But it was the books that stopped her, shelves of them lining the walls, law texts, medical manuals, poetry, volumes on geology and surveying and animal husbandry, a library that would not have been out of place in a judge's study or a doctor's office. The man closed the door behind her. The sound was final. "Take off the veil." Grace's hands went to the heavy lace that her father had insisted on, the theatrical concealment that was supposed to buy time or mercy or at least postpone discovery. Her fingers found the pins. "I already know who you are," the man said. He moved to the fireplace, his back to her, giving her the privacy of not being watched. Warren Harper boasted in the Cheyenne saloons about his golden daughter, showed a photograph to anyone who would look. "I assume you are not her." Grace pulled the veil free. Her scar was exposed to the firelight, the raised tissue catching the glow impossible to miss or mistake. The man turned. He looked at her face, at the scar, at the plain features that had been judged and found insufficient by every mirror and every town gossip and every potential suitor from Bitter Creek to Laramie. He stepped closer. Grace forced herself not to step back, not to drop her eyes, not to show the fear that was crawling up her spine like ice water. He raised his hand. Grace flinched despite herself. His fingers, calloused and gentle, touched the edge of her scar, traced it from her ear down to where it disappeared beneath her collar. "Burns," he said. "Kitchen fire. You were young." "How do you know?" Grace's voice came out steadier than she felt. He held up his left forearm. Through the flannel she could see the shadow of scarring, the mottled texture of skin that had been melted and healed badly. "Artillery shell, Fredericksburg, 1862. Exploded in the trench next to me, killed 2 men, cooked my arm like meat on a spit." He dropped his hand and stepped back. Warren Harper thought he was clever sending the daughter he's ashamed of instead of the one he treasures. He thinks I'll be angry, that I'll send you back or take my rage out on you. The man moved to a cabinet, pulled down 2 tin cups, filled them with water from a bucket. He handed one to Grace. "But Warren Harper is a fool." Grace took the cup. Her hands were shaking. Why? Because up here gold is soft and useless. It bends. It breaks. It can't hold an edge. He drank from his own cup, watching her over the rim. Iron is what survives. Iron takes the heat and the hammer and comes out stronger. You have an iron scar, Miss Harper. That tells me everything I need to know about whether you'll break. Grace stared at him. 26 years of being told she was worthless, that the scar made her ugly, that her value was less than her sister's by every measure that mattered. And this man, this stranger, this supposed monster of the mountains, looked at the same scar and saw strength. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I'll tell you in the morning. For now, sleep. Your room is upstairs, first door on the left." He turned away conversation over moving to bank the fire for the night. "Wait." Grace's voice stopped him. "I don't even know your name." He looked back, and for a moment something moved behind those steel-gray eyes. Something that might have been surprise, or might have been the echo of a time when names mattered. "Caleb," he said. "Caleb Blackwood. And you're Grace Harper, though I suspect by the time this is done one of those names will change." He left her standing in the center of the cabin, cup in hand, mind reeling. Grace climbed the stairs. The room he had indicated was small but clean, with a bed that had a real mattress and blankets that smelled of cedar. A window looked out over the valley, and even in the darkness she could see the lights of Bitter Creek distant and irrelevant. On the small table beside the bed was a letter yellowed with age. She should not have read it, but she did. "My dearest Caleb, Mary asks about you every day. She drew you a picture of the garden. Please come home safe. The war cannot last forever. Your loving wife, Anna." Grace set the letter down carefully as though it might break. She understood then that this room had belonged to someone, that Caleb Blackwood had not always been alone on this mountain. She lay down on the bed, still dressed, and listened to the sounds of the cabin. Downstairs, Caleb was moving around the creak of floorboards marking his passage. Then silence. Then from outside the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. Grace went to the window. In the moonlight she could see him, splitting logs in the middle of the night in the freezing cold, working with the kind of intensity that spoke not of need, but of escape. She thought about the letter, about a wife named Anna who had waited, about a daughter named Mary who had drawn pictures. She thought about what kind of grief could drive a man to spend 15 years alone on a mountain. And she thought about the wolf carcasses on the trail shot clean through the heart. Outside the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance wolves howled. It was the loneliest sound Grace had ever heard. She touched the locket at her throat. Strength is choosing to stand when they expect you to kneel. Tomorrow Caleb Blackwood would test her, would decide if she was worth keeping or worth sending back to a father who had already made clear she had no value. Grace closed her eyes and made a decision. She would not kneel. Not for her father, not for this stranger, not for anyone. If she was going to die on this mountain, she would die standing. Grace woke to silence. Not the silence of sleep, but the active silence of someone deliberately not making noise. She sat up disoriented. Dawn light filtered through the window, weak and watery. How long had she slept? Downstairs she could hear movement, controlled, purposeful. She descended the stairs and found Caleb at the table reading. The book was Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. He had 3 separate volumes open, cross-referencing something, making notes in a ledger with handwriting so precise it looked printed. He glanced up as she reached the bottom step. "There's coffee, bread in the box, butter in the cold cellar." He returned to his reading. Grace poured coffee. It was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and she was grateful. She found the bread, cut a slice, spread it with butter that was hard as stone from the cold. She ate, standing at the counter watching Caleb work. After 10 minutes he closed the books. "Do you read?" "Yes." "Well, my grandfather was a circuit judge. He taught me before he died." Caleb's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Can you write?" "Well enough." "Arithmetic, basic sums, some geometry." He stood, moved to the bookshelves, pulled down a medical text, opened it to a diagram of human anatomy, the muscular system rendered in precise ink drawings. Where is the subclavian artery? Grace stepped closer, studied the diagram, pointed. There, beneath the clavicle. It supplies blood to the arm. If it's severed, death in minutes, unless you can clamp it and suture fast. Caleb closed the book. Something in his expression had shifted, though Grace could not name what. Your grandfather taught you medicine as well as law. The Bible, my mother's medical Bible. She wanted to be a nurse before she married my father. Grace set down her coffee cup. What is this A test? Everything is a test. The question is whether you know what's being tested. Caleb moved to the door, pulled on a heavy coat. Get dressed for cold. We're going outside. Why? Because I need to know if you can work, if you're worth the $300 your father bet and lost, or if you're just another mouth that eats and produces nothing. The words were harsh, but his tone was not. It was simply factual. Grace had spent enough time around her father's cruelty to recognize the difference. She went upstairs, pulled on her second dress over the first for warmth, wrapped herself in her shawl. When she came down, Caleb handed her a pair of gloves. They were my wife's, he said. She was about your size. Grace took them. The leather was soft, well-oiled, fitted for smaller hands than Caleb's. Thank you. Outside, the cold hit like a fist. The sun was up, but gave no warmth, just a pale disk in a sky the color of old ice. The snow was 3 feet deep in places, packed hard by wind and time. Caleb led her to the shed. Inside were the animals she had heard the night before: 6 chickens, 2 goats, a milk cow with patient eyes, all of them healthy, well-fed, their spaces clean. You'll feed them, Caleb said. Morning and evening. The feed is in the barrels. The goats get hay and grain. The chickens get cracked corn. The cow gets hay water, and you'll milk her twice a day. I know how to milk. Good. Then you'll do it now. I'll watch. Grace hung her shawl on a nail, rolled up her sleeves despite the cold, and sat on the stool beside the cow. Her hands found the rhythm immediately, the squeeze and pull that drew milk in steady streams into the bucket. She had done this 1,000 times at her father's place before he sold the cow to pay for whiskey. Caleb watched in silence. When the bucket was 2/3 full, he nodded. Adequate. High praise, apparently. They returned to the cabin. Grace carried the milk heavy and sloshing. Caleb carried an armload of firewood. Inside, he set the wood by the hearth and turned to her. Tonight I'll bring back meat. You'll prepare it. What kind? Does it matter? Grace thought about the wolf carcasses on the trail. No. Good. He left. Just walked out the door, picked up a rifle that had been leaning against the porch, and disappeared into the tree line. Grace stood in the empty cabin, still holding the milk bucket, and wondered what kind of life she had walked into. She spent the day cleaning, not because Caleb had asked, but because she needed to understand the space she was living in. The cabin was not dirty, but it was neglected. Dust on the books, soot on the windows. The kind of gradual accumulation that happens when a man stops caring about comfort and focuses only on survival. Grace found rags, made her own lye soap from ash and fat she found in the cold cellar. She scrubbed the windows until she could see the valley clearly. She wiped down the bookshelves, careful with the volumes, reading spines as she went. Keats, Wordsworth, Darwin, a complete set of medical texts from Johns Hopkins, a surveyor's manual with detailed maps of Wyoming territory, including coal deposits marked in red ink. In the corner of one shelf, hidden behind a stack of agricultural journals, she found a journal, leather-bound, Caleb's handwriting. She should not have opened it, but her hands moved of their own accord. The first entry was dated June 12, 1863. I did what I had to do. 20 men, all of them boys, none older than 17. Drummond gave the order. I watched it happen. I did not stop it. God forgive me for my cowardice. I will never forgive myself. Grace's hands shook. She closed the journal, shoved it back behind the other books. Whatever this was, whatever Caleb Blackwood had done or failed to do during the war, it was not her business. But the words stayed with her. The refrain of soldiers everywhere, duty performed, guilt carried. Caleb returned as the sun touched the horizon. He carried a young buck over his shoulders, the carcass fresh steam still rising from the gutted cavity. He walked straight to the kitchen table, dropped it there on the surface Grace had just cleaned. Blood pooled instantly on the wood. Caleb stepped back, crossed his arms, and waited. This was the test. Grace understood it immediately. He expected her to scream, to faint, to prove that she was a town girl who could not handle the reality of meat before it became a meal. Grace looked at the deer, then at Caleb. Then she reached down, pulled the small knife from her boot, and began the work. She had butchered before, not often, but enough. The winter when her father had been too drunk to do it himself, when starvation had been more frightening than blood. She knew where to cut to separate hide from flesh, how to find the joints, which organs to save and which to discard. Her hands moved with the confidence of remembered skill. She did not look at Caleb. She focused on the work. After 5 minutes, Caleb spoke. "You've done this before." "Yes." "Where did you learn necessity?" "When my father gambled away the winter stores, I learned to butcher or starve." Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled his own knife, a hunting blade with an 8-inch edge, and moved to stand beside her. "You're too slow. Move over." They worked side by side. Caleb's movements were efficient, brutal, the work of someone who had field-dressed more than animals. Grace kept pace, matching his rhythm. Their shoulders brushed. Blood covered both their hands. "Your father," Caleb said, not looking up from his work, "is a waste of skin." Grace paused, looked at him. "And yours, was he better?" The knife in Caleb's hand stopped moving. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment Grace thought she had overstepped. Then his mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but close. "My father was a minister, Presbyterian. He taught me that God loves the righteous and punishes the wicked." Caleb returned to the butchering. "Then I went to war and learned that God doesn't exist. Only men with guns." They finished the work in silence. The meat went into the cold cellar wrapped in cheesecloth. The hide would be scraped and cured later. Grace washed her hands in the basin, scrubbing until the water ran clear. That night they ate stew. Grace had made it from the venison, adding wild onions and dried beans and salt. It was thick, rich, the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs and kept you warm through the night. Caleb ate 3 bowls. He did not compliment the food, but he did not leave the table immediately either. He sat, packed his pipe with tobacco, and stared into the fire. "There's something you need to know," he said finally, "about this mountain, about why I'm really here." Grace set down her spoon. "I'm listening." "There's a man coming for us. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but he's coming." Caleb drew on his pipe, exhaled smoke. "His name is Magnus Drummond. He's a senator now, cattle baron, richest man in Wyoming Territory. And 15 years ago, he was my commanding officer." "What happened?" "I testified against him, court-martial. He was convicted, dishonorably discharged, but his money and connections kept him out of prison." Caleb's eyes were distant, seeing something Grace could not. "He swore he would make me pay. I came here to make it harder. Bought this land under a false name, lived quiet, 15 years of quiet. And now your father's debt has put me back on the map. Drummond has people everywhere. They'll have told him by now that Caleb Blackwood has a woman living with him. That makes me visible again. And visibility up here is the same as a target." Grace absorbed this. "So you're using me as bait?" "No." Caleb turned to look at her. "I'm giving you a choice. I can take you back to town tonight, give you money enough to start over somewhere else, or you can stay, learn to fight, and help me end this. If I stay, what am I to you? Partner, not property, not a debt payment. Partner." He stood, moved to the corner of the cabin, pulled a key from his pocket, unlocked a heavy wooden chest. Inside were weapons: Winchester rifle, 2 Colt revolvers, a shotgun, boxes of ammunition. "Tomorrow," Caleb said, "I teach you to shoot." Grace looked at the guns, at this man who was offering her something no one else ever had, not protection, not rescue, but partnership, the chance to stand and fight instead of kneel and accept. She thought about her father's face when he sent her away, about Rosalind's laughter, about 26 years of being told she had no value. "I'll stay," Grace said. Caleb nodded as though this was what he had expected. "Then sleep. We start at dawn." That night, Grace lay in the small room upstairs and listened to the mountain, the wind in the pines, the distant howl of wolves, and from below the creak of floorboards as Caleb paced unable or unwilling to rest. She touched the locket at her throat. Her mother's words. "Strength is choosing to stand when they expect you to kneel." For the first time in her life, Grace was not kneeling. She did not know yet whether that would save her or kill her, but she knew with a certainty that went bone deep that she would never kneel again. 300 miles southeast in Cheyenne, a different kind of fire burned. Magnus Drummond's office occupied the entire third floor of the Cattlemen's Association building. The walls were paneled in imported oak. The desk was mahogany. The carpet was wool thick enough to muffle footsteps, expensive enough to make visitors nervous about tracking in mud. Drummond stood at the window looking out over the town that he effectively owned. 68 years old, silver-haired, still broad in the shoulders despite his age. He wore a suit that cost more than most men earned in a year. His hands clasped behind his back bore the calluses of earlier work, but were now manicured weekly by a barber who knew better than to draw blood. On the desk behind him lay a telegram. Blackwood accepted Harper's daughter. Both on the mountain. Scout confirms occupation. Await orders. The telegram was signed with a single initial S. Drummond turned from the window, picked up the telegram, read it again though he had memorized the words on first reading. 42 years, he said to the empty room. He moved to the wall where a photograph hung, protected by glass fading to sepia, but still clear enough. Two men in Union uniforms, mud-spattered and exhausted, standing in what might have been a trench or might have been a grave. Their arms were around each other's shoulders. They were smiling, though their eyes were old beyond their years. Drummond touched the glass. His finger traced the face of the younger man beside him. Caleb Blackwood at 22, before the scar, before the silver hair, before everything that came after. "We saved each other's lives," Drummond said. "Antietam. You took a bullet meant for me. Gettysburg. I pulled you out of the fire when the ammunition wagon exploded." He turned away from the photograph. "And then you stood in that courtroom and told them I was a murderer." The door opened. A man entered without knocking. Cole Strand was 42, lean and weathered, with the kind of face that had been handsome before whiskey, and violence had carved it into something harder. He wore a long coat and a gun belt with 2 revolvers tied down low. "You wanted a report," Strand said. "Sit." Strand sat. He did not remove his hat. "How many men would it take," Drummond asked, "to kill Blackwood? 3 good shots if we catch him in the open. To take him alive, 12.5 of them would die trying. And the girl," Strand shrugged, "Harper's daughter, the ugly one from what the scout says. Blackwood took her anyway. Maybe he's more desperate than we thought." Drummond picked up a decanter of whiskey, poured 2 glasses, handed one to Strand. "I don't want him dead, not yet." "Why not?" "Because I want him to watch first. I want him to see everything he's built burn. The mountain, the cabin, whatever fool hope he has for a life up there." Drummond drank. "Then when he has nothing left, I'll take his land, and after that, I'll take his life." Strand studied his glass. "That's a lot of hate for something that happened 15 years ago." "Hate?" Drummond laughed, a sound without humor. "This isn't hate. This is justice. Do you know what that court-martial cost me? My commission, my honor, my brother." "Your brother died in the war." "My brother died because Caleb Blackwood left his post to bury a daughter who was already dead." Drummond's voice went flat, empty. "The hospital was supposed to be guarded. Blackwood was supposed to be there. Instead, he abandoned his duty. 23 patients died in the raid. 2 nurses. One of the nurses was pregnant." He refilled his glass. "One of the dead was my brother, Captain Jonathan Drummond. He was a field surgeon. He stayed with his patients while the raiders set the building on fire. They found his body in the ashes lying across a wounded soldier he was trying to protect." Strand said nothing. There was nothing to say to that kind of loss. Caleb Blackwood didn't pull the trigger, Drummond continued, but he might as well have. His cowardice killed my brother. And then to cover his own guilt, he stood up in that courtroom and testified that I was a murderer for executing the raiders who burned that hospital. Were they murderers, I mean? They were Confederate soldiers who had just killed 25 unarmed men and 2 women. They were war criminals. I executed them under field authority. It was justice. Blackwood didn't see it that way. Blackwood saw a way to deflect blame from himself. That's all he ever saw. Drummond set down his glass. I gave him 15 years. 15 years to hide on that mountain and tell himself he was atoning. But the moment he accepted that woman, the moment he stepped back into society, even in that small way, he declared the ceasefire over. Strand leaned back in his chair. What do you want me to do? Nothing, yet. Drummond smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had waited a very long time for this moment. Let them have the winter. Let them think they're safe. Let Blackwood teach the girl to shoot and tell himself he's building something worth protecting. And then in the spring when the snow melts and they can't run, we take the mountain, we burn the cabin, we take the woman, and we make Caleb Blackwood watch while I take everything he thought he could keep. Strand stood. You're paying me well enough, but I need to know. Is this about the land and the coal, or is this about revenge? Drummond looked at him. Does it matter? To me, no. But it might matter to you when it's over and you still feel empty. Thank you for the philosophy lesson, Drummond said dryly. You're dismissed. Strand left. The door closed with a soft click. Drummond returned to the photograph on the wall. 2 young men who had believed in the way that only the young can believe that surviving the war meant winning. You should have died at Gettysburg, Drummond said to the image. I should have let the fire take you. It would have been kinder than what's coming. He pulled the photograph from the wall, turned it over. On the back in faded ink was a date and a location. July 3rd, 1863. Gettysburg. Brothers in arms. Brothers forever. Drummond struck a match, held it to the corner of the photograph, watched the paper catch curl blacken. Goodbye, brother, he said. The photograph burned to ash in his hand. The first lesson came with the dawn. Grace woke to find Caleb already outside, standing in the clearing behind the cabin with the Winchester cradled in his arms like something familiar. The sky was the color of steel pregnant with snow that had not yet decided to fall. Grace pulled on both dresses again, wrapped herself in the shawl, and stepped into the cold. Her breath crystallized immediately, hanging in the air like small ghosts. Caleb looked at her. You'll need better than that if you're going to survive up here. He disappeared into the cabin and returned with a coat. Heavy wool lined with fur sized for someone smaller than him, but larger than her. This was Anna's, he said, holding it out. She wore it the winter before she died. It's been in the trunk since. Grace took it carefully as though it might break. The wool was soft, well kept, despite the years. She put it on. It smelled faintly of cedar and something else, something that might have been lavender once. Thank you. Caleb nodded and turned his attention back to the Winchester. This is a model 1873. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Fires a .44-40 cartridge. Effective range about 200 yards, though I've made shots at 300 when the wind was right. He worked the lever ejecting the round from the chamber, catching it in his palm. The motion was fluid, automatic, the result of thousands of repetitions. But you're not going to use this. Not yet. He set the Winchester against a stump and picked up the shotgun. This is what you need to learn first. The shotgun was shorter, heavier, the barrel sawed down to maybe 18 inches. Illegal in town probably, but up here the law was whatever kept you alive. 12 gauge, double barrel, 2 shells. Caleb broke it open, showed her the empty chambers. You aim for center mass, not the head. The head moves, the chest doesn't. And at close range with buckshot, you don't need to be precise, you just need to be committed. He loaded 2 shells, snapped the barrel closed. Hold it like this. He demonstrated the stock tight against his shoulder, his cheek pressed to the wood. Brace yourself, the recoil will knock you back if you're not ready. He handed her the shotgun. Grace had never held a gun before. The weight surprised her, the cold of the metal, even through her gloves. She tried to mirror Caleb's stance, pulling the stock into her shoulder the way he had shown. "Tighter," Caleb said. He stepped behind her, adjusted her grip. His hands were impersonal, clinical. "If there's space between the stock and your shoulder, the recoil will bruise. You want it flush." Grace pressed harder. The wooden stock dug into the hollow of her shoulder. "Good. Now sight down the barrel. See that pine tree? The one with the broken branch." Grace found it, maybe 30 yards away, close enough to see the rough texture of the bark. "When you're ready, squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Squeeze." Grace took a breath, held it, squeezed. The world exploded. The shotgun roared and kicked like a living thing, slamming back into her shoulder with enough force to drive her back 2 steps. Her ears rang. Her shoulder screamed. The tree was untouched. "You closed your eyes," Caleb said. "I did not." "You did. Right before you fired. Again." They worked for 2 hours. By the end, Grace's shoulder was one massive bruise, and her ears had stopped ringing, but still felt stuffed with cotton. She had fired 16 rounds. She had hit the tree exactly 4 times. "Progress," Caleb said, which was apparently high praise. They returned to the cabin. Grace's hands were shaking partly from cold, partly from adrenaline. Caleb handed her a cup of coffee and gestured to the chair by the fire. "Sit. Rest your shoulder." Grace sat. The heat from the fire was a physical relief, warming skin that had gone numb in the mountain cold. Caleb disappeared into what Grace had come to think of as his room, the door at the back of the cabin that was always closed. He returned with a small wooden box. Inside were glass vials, tinctures, a mortar, and pestle. "Arnica," he said, selecting a vial, "for bruising. And this." Another vial, darker. "Willow bark extract, for pain." He mixed the arnica with a neutral oil, handed it to her. "Put this on your shoulder before bed. Tomorrow we do it again." Grace took the vial. "How long did it take you to learn to shoot?" "I was 7 when my father first put a rifle in my hands. We ate what we killed, or we didn't eat." Caleb sat in the other chair, stretched his legs toward the fire. "But learning to shoot and learning to kill are different lessons. The first is mechanics. The second is decision." "Have you killed many men?" The question hung in the air. Grace regretted it immediately, but Caleb did not seem offended. He just looked at the fire, his face unreadable. "Enough," he said finally. "In the war, after. Enough that I stopped counting because the number didn't matter anymore. They were either threats or they weren't. The ones that were, I eliminated. The ones that weren't, I let pass." "Do you regret it?" "Some. The ones who didn't need killing. The ones I shot because I was scared or angry or just tired of being careful." He turned to look at her. "But most, no. Most of them would have killed me or someone else if I hadn't stopped them first. That's not murder. That's just faster math." Grace thought about this. About her father who had sent her to die rather than lose his pretty daughter. About Rosalind who had laughed. About all the small cruelties that had taught her that the world was not kind to those who could not defend themselves. "Teach me," she said, "not just to shoot. Teach me to decide." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. But understand this. Once you cross that line, once you look at another human being and make the calculation that their life is worth less than yours or someone you're protecting, you can't uncross it. You'll carry it forever." "I'm already carrying things," Grace said quietly. "At least this weight will be my choice." Over the next 2 weeks, the lessons continued. Shooting in the morning, other skills in the afternoon. Caleb taught her to track in snow to read the signs of passage, taught her which plants were edible even in winter, which could be made into medicine, taught her how to set snares for rabbits, how to skin them, how to waste nothing. He taught her to move quietly, to use the terrain to think 3 moves ahead. Military thinking, he called it. Not how to win a fight, but how to avoid fights you couldn't win and ensure you only fought when the odds were in your favor. And in the evenings by the fire, he taught her other things. He walked her through his law books, explaining precedent and jurisdiction, and the difference between territorial law and federal law. He showed her the surveyor's maps, pointing out the coal deposits beneath the mountain, explaining why Magnus Drummond wanted this land badly enough to kill for it. Coal means railroads, Caleb said, tracing the red marks on the map. Railroads mean money and water. He tapped a blue line that represented a stream flowing from the mountain. This feeds the whole northern valley. Whoever controls this water controls 20,000 acres of grazing land below. Drummond has been buying up claims for 5 years, but he can't complete his monopoly without this peak. Why didn't you sell? Because I bought this land with blood money. Compensation for injuries sustained in service. It's the only clean thing I own. And because the moment I sell, the miners in the valley lose their water rights. Drummond will charge them prices they can't afford, drive them out, and consolidate everything under his control. Grace looked at the map at the web of claims and counterclaims that Caleb had marked in different colored inks. So this isn't just about revenge, it's about power. It's always about power. Revenge is just the excuse powerful men give when they want something and don't want to admit they're simply greedy. On the 14th day, something changed. They were working on rifle shooting. Grace, learning the heavier recoil of the Winchester when Caleb suddenly went still. His head turned, eyes scanning the tree line. Grace saw nothing, heard nothing, but she had learned to trust Caleb's instincts. What is it? Movement. Northeast, maybe 200 yards. Caleb's voice was calm, but his hand had moved to the revolver at his hip. Go inside, now. Grace did not argue. She walked quickly back to the cabin, but instead of staying inside, she took up position at the window with the shotgun. If someone was coming, she would be ready. Minutes passed. Then Caleb emerged from the trees, walking backward, rifle aimed at something Grace couldn't see. Behind him, hands raised, came Samuel Bridger. Grace opened the door. Samuel entered, moving carefully, his hands still up until Caleb lowered the rifle. Caleb signed something. Samuel signed back a rapid exchange that Grace couldn't follow. Then Samuel pulled out his slate and chalk. Drummond sent scouts. 3 men. They were asking questions in Bitter Creek. About you. About the girl. When? Caleb asked. 2 days ago. I came as soon as I heard. Caleb read the slate, his face hardening. Did they see you come up the mountain? Samuel shook his head, then wrote, I went through the back trail. No one followed. Good. Caleb moved to the window, looked out at the valley. It's starting. Earlier than I thought, but not unexpected. Grace stepped forward. What do we do? We prepare, and we don't give them an opening. He turned to Samuel. How many miners would stand with us? Samuel considered, then wrote, maybe 15. Good men, but not soldiers. I don't need soldiers. I need witnesses, and enough guns to make Drummond think twice about a direct assault. Caleb looked at Grace. How's your shooting? Better than 2 weeks ago. Not good enough. We'll double the practice. Every day until they come. He turned back to Samuel. Tell the miners to arm themselves, but stay quiet. No posturing, no threats. Just be ready. When Drummond moves, it will be fast. Samuel nodded and left, disappearing into the trees as silently as he had come. Grace set down the shotgun. How long do we have? Weeks, maybe a month. Drummond will wait for better weather. Right now, the snow makes it hard to move men and supplies. He'll wait until the trail's clear, then he'll come with overwhelming force. Caleb checked the Winchester counting rounds. But we can't just wait. We need advantages. What kind of advantages? The legal kind. He pulled out the deed to his land, the survey maps, the documentation of his water rights. If Drummond tries to take this by force, he's committing a federal crime. But if he can prove I'm not the legal owner, or that I've abandoned the claim, he can file a counterclaim and use the law to steal it. Can he prove that? Not with the truth. But men like Drummond don't need truth. They need judges who owe them favors and witnesses willing to lie. Caleb spread the documents on the table. Which is why we need to make this ironclad. No gaps. No room for interpretation. Grace studied the papers. Her grandfather's training kicked in the legal mind he had tried to cultivate before the fire, before her mother's death, before everything fell apart. "You have the original homestead filing," she said, pointing. "Dated 1863. That's solid. But where are your tax receipts?" Caleb pulled out another folder. "Here. Every year from 1863 to present. Continuous occupation. Samuel can testify to that. He's been working for me since 1865. Grace nodded, thinking. "What about improvements? The law requires that you make improvements to maintain the claim. The cabin, the animal sheds, the spring house, the fences." Caleb gestured around. "All documented with dated photographs I had a surveyor take in 1870 and again in 1875. "Good. That creates a paper trail." Grace picked up another document. "What's this? Water rights filing. Separate from the land claim. Filed in 1864. Grace read it carefully. Something nagged at her, some detail that felt wrong. Then she saw it. "This signature. It's not yours." Caleb looked. "It is. I signed it myself." "No. Look at the capital B in Blackwood. In this document the loop is closed. In all your other signatures it's open. Someone forged this." Caleb stared at the document. For the first time since Grace had met him, he looked genuinely shocked. "That's impossible. I filed this myself in Cheyenne, watched the clerk stamp it. Then someone replaced it, after the fact, with a forgery." Grace felt cold. "If Drummond can prove this is fraudulent, he can claim you never had legal water rights, and without the water rights the land claim is nearly worthless. He could buy it for pennies and claim he's doing the territory a favor by correcting a clerical error." Caleb sat down heavily. "I've been set up. For 15 years I thought I was safe because I had the law on my side, but Drummond has been working underneath, pulling out the foundations one document at a time. We need the real filing, the original. It would be in the Territorial Records Office, in Cheyenne. Then we go to Cheyenne." Caleb shook his head. "That's 3 days' travel each way, 6 days total. If Drummond knows I've left the mountain, he'll move immediately. We'd come back to ashes." Grace looked at the forged document, then at Caleb. An idea was forming, dangerous and necessary. "You don't go," she said. "I do." "Absolutely not." "Listen, Drummond is watching you, not me. No one cares about Harper's ugly daughter. I can ride down, take the stage to Cheyenne, get the documents, and be back in 4 days, maybe 5. And if they stop you, why would they? I'm nobody, just a woman running an errand." Grace met his eyes. "You said we were partners." "Partners divide the work. You hold the mountain. I get the proof we need to defend it." Caleb stood paced to the window, stared out at the snow. Grace could see the war in him, the instinct to protect, fighting against the logic of her argument. Finally he turned back. "If I let you do this, you follow my rules exactly. You take the back trail that Samuel used. You tell no one who you are or where you're going. You get the documents and you come straight back. No delays, no risks." "Agreed. And you take this." He pulled a leather pouch from his pocket, heavy with coins. "That's $200 in gold. More than enough for stage fare and bribes if you need them. The clerk at the records office is named Patterson. Tell him you're there on behalf of C. Blackwood regarding the 1864 water rights filing. He'll remember. I tipped him $50 when I made the original filing." Grace took the pouch. The weight of it was significant, the gold coins clinking softly against each other, more money than she had ever held in her life. "If something goes wrong," Caleb continued, "if Drummond's men stop you, or if you sense danger, you don't come back here. You get on a stage going anywhere else, San Francisco, Denver, somewhere far from Wyoming. You use that money to start over. I'm coming back. Grace." He grabbed her shoulders, gentle but firm. "If something happens to you because I sent you into danger, I will never forgive myself. So promise me. If it goes wrong, you run. You survive." Grace looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just concern, not just tactical worry, something deeper, something that recognized her as more than a partner, more than a strategic asset. "I promise," she said, "but nothing will go wrong. I'll be back in 4 days." She left at dawn the next morning riding one of Caleb's horses, a sturdy mare built for mountain trails. Caleb had given her a map, a compass, and a revolver that he'd spent the previous evening teaching her to use. "6 shots," he said as he helped her mount. "If you need more than 6, you're already dead, so make each one count." Encouraging. "I'm not trying to encourage you. I'm trying to keep you alive." He handed her the reins. 4 days, Grace. If you're not back in 4 days, I'm coming after you." Grace looked down at him. In the pre-dawn light, his face was all sharp angles and shadow, but his eyes were clear, worried. "I'll be back," she said. She rode down the mountain following the trail Samuel had marked for her, staying in the trees where the snow was thinner and the passage less obvious. By the time the sun cleared the peaks, she was miles from the cabin, alone in the vast silence of the wilderness. Grace had been alone before, but this was different. This was choosing to be alone, choosing to ride into potential danger because the alternative was waiting for danger to come to them. Her shoulders still ached from the rifle practice, her hands were rough from work, but as she rode through the pine forests, breathing air so cold it hurt her lungs, Grace felt something she had never felt before. She felt free. Grace was gone for 3 days before the first attack came. Caleb had known it was coming, had felt it the way animals feel earthquakes before they strike, some deep instinct that read danger in the silence and the stillness. The mountain was too quiet. The wolves had stopped howling. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He was splitting wood when they came. Afternoon, the sun already dropping toward the peaks, the temperature plummeting. Caleb had his coat off despite the cold, working in shirt sleeves because the physical labor generated enough heat to make the winter air feel almost temperate. The first shot came without warning. The bullet hit the chopping block 6 inches from Caleb's hand, spraying splinters. Caleb dropped the axe and dove behind the woodpile in one fluid motion, his hand finding the revolver at his hip even as he rolled. 3 men emerged from the tree line, armed with rifles, spread out in a tactical formation that spoke of military training or at least professional experience. "Caleb Blackwood." The shout came from the center man, young, maybe 30, with the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a fight. "Senator Drummond wants to talk." Caleb did not answer. He tracked their movements, calculating distances. 70 yards to the nearest, 85 to the farthest. Long range for a revolver. Possible but not certain. Come out peaceful, and nobody gets hurt. Caleb had heard that lie before. In the war, in the years after. It was always a lie. He whistled 3 short bursts, the signal he and Samuel had arranged. From the shed, Samuel appeared, moving low and fast. He had a rifle, an old Springfield, but his hands were steady and his aim was true. He took position behind the well, creating a crossfire. The 3 men saw Samuel, hesitated. The math had changed. 2 defenders with cover versus 3 attackers in the open. "Last chance, Blackwood." Caleb stood up, keeping the woodpile between himself and the rifleman. "Tell Drummond if he wants to talk, he can ride up here himself instead of sending boys to do murder." "We're not here for murder, just to deliver a message." "Then deliver it and leave." The man grinned. "The message is that this mountain belongs to Senator Drummond now. You got 1 week to clear out. Take what you can carry and go. Otherwise, we come back with enough men to bury you where you stand." Caleb raised his revolver, aimed carefully, and shot the man through the left shoulder. The crack of the Colt echoed across the valley. The man went down screaming, his rifle flying from his hands. The other 2 dove for cover. "Here's my message," Caleb shouted. "Anyone who steps on my land without invitation will be shot. Not in the shoulder next time, in the chest. Now take your friend and get gone before I change my mind about killing all 3 of you." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the 2 uninjured men grabbed their wounded companion and dragged him back into the trees. Caleb could hear them crashing through the underbrush, their retreat neither tactical nor dignified. Samuel emerged from behind the well. He signed a question. "No," Caleb answered. "I let them go because I want Drummond to know exactly what he's facing. 3 men isn't a serious attack. It's a probe. He's testing our response, seeing if we'll fold or fight." Samuel signed again. "Now he knows we fight." They secured the cabin as the sun set, barricaded the windows with furniture, filled barrels with water in case of fire, counted ammunition. Caleb had perhaps 300 rounds total split between rifle, revolver, and shotgun. Enough for a sustained fight, but not a siege. "Grace should be back tomorrow," Caleb said more to himself than to Samuel. "She gets the documents, we have legal protection. Drummond can't just burn us out if we can prove federal jurisdiction." Samuel looked at him with an expression that suggested he had doubts about whether legal protection would matter when facing hired killers, but he signed nothing. Night fell. Caleb took the first watch sitting by the window with the Winchester across his knees. Every sound made his finger tighten on the trigger. The crack of settling timber, the rustle of wind in the pines, the distant howl of a wolf finally breaking the silence. Around midnight, Samuel relieved him. Caleb tried to sleep but could not. His mind kept cycling through scenarios. Drummond's next move, Grace on the road. The 1,000 ways this could go wrong. He thought about the journal entry from 1863. "I did what I had to do." But had he? Had executing those raiders been necessary, or had it just been easier than letting them live and face trial? Had he testified against Drummond to seek justice or to deflect guilt from himself for abandoning his post? Grace's question echoed in his memory. "Do you regret it?" The answer was more complicated than he had admitted. He regretted the necessity. Regretted living in a world where violence was often the only language that men with power understood. But the specific acts, most of them, no. He had done what was needed to survive, to protect others, to stop worse violence from occurring. Most of them. The hospital burned in his memory, 15 years old, but fresh as yesterday. The smell of burning flesh, the screams, the bodies. 23 patients, 2 nurses, his brother-in-arms brother. And all of it because Caleb had chosen to say goodbye to his dying daughter instead of staying at his post. He had been court-martialed for abandonment of duty. Drummond had been court-martialed for the executions. Both had been convicted. Both had been discharged. But Drummond's family had money and connections. He had landed on his feet, built an empire, become a senator. Caleb had hidden on a mountain for 15 years. Was that justice? Or just different flavors of escape? Dawn came without answers. Samuel signed that he had seen no movement during the night. They ate a cold breakfast, not wanting smoke from the stove to give away their position. "Today," Caleb said. "Grace should be back today." But the day passed, and Grace did not come. By evening, Caleb was pacing. By midnight, he was loading his saddlebags. "I'm going after her," he told Samuel. Samuel blocked the door, signed emphatically. "I know it's what they want. I know leaving the cabin is tactically stupid." "I don't care." Caleb pushed past. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." He made it as far as the porch before Samuel grabbed his arm. The older man's grip was iron. He pulled Caleb around, signed with the urgency of someone who knew words alone would not be enough. "Grace is smart. She can handle herself. You taught her. You leave now. Drummond wins. He takes the mountain. He burns everything. And Grace comes back to ashes." Caleb stared at Samuel. The logic was sound, maddeningly sound. But logic did not ease the knot in his chest, the certainty that something had gone wrong. "One more day," Caleb said finally. "If she's not back by tomorrow night, I go, and you can shoot me in the leg if you want to stop me, but anything less and I'm riding out." Samuel nodded, released his arm. They went inside. Caleb sat by the window with the Winchester. Samuel sat by the door with the shotgun. And they waited. The attack came 2 hours before dawn. No warning this time. Just the sudden bloom of fire in the darkness, multiple torches arcing through the air toward the cabin roof. Caleb was moving before they landed, grabbing buckets of water, shouting for Samuel. The roof caught. old timber dried by years and winter air. The flames spread fast tongues of orange light licking up toward the peak. Outside, men were shouting. Caleb risked a look through the window. 6, no 7, all armed, moving in a coordinated assault. "They want to burn us out!" Caleb grabbed the ladder, climbed toward the loft. "Keep them off me!" Samuel positioned himself at the window. The shotgun roared. Someone outside screamed. Caleb reached the loft, kicked open the small access door to the roof. The heat hit him like a fist. Flames everywhere, the cedar shingles curling and blackening. He grabbed a bucket of water Samuel had passed up, threw it at the nearest flames. The water hissed into steam. The fire barely noticed. A bullet punched through the roof 6 inches from Caleb's hand. He dropped flat, crawled to the edge, looked down. One of the attackers was circling around, trying for a better angle. Caleb pulled his revolver, aimed down over the edge of the roof, and fired 3 times. The man went down, but the fire was spreading. The whole north side of the roof was engulfed now. Another few minutes and it would reach the support beams. Then the whole structure would collapse. "We have to abandon the cabin," Caleb shouted down to Samuel. Samuel signed something emphatic. "I don't care about the furniture. Grab the documents, the deed, the water rights filing, everything legal, leave the rest." He climbed back down, choking on smoke. The inside of the cabin was filling with it, thick and black and suffocating. Samuel was shoving papers into a leather satchel, moving with desperate efficiency. Caleb grabbed the Winchester, the shotgun, the revolvers, shoved ammunition into his pockets. His fingers found something else in the desk drawer. The locket. Anna's locket, the one he had meant to give to Mary but had never had the chance. He pocketed it. "Go." He pushed Samuel toward the back door. "I'll cover." They burst out into the night. The cold air was a shock after the heat of the burning cabin. Caleb spun, fired the Winchester from the hip at a shadow moving toward them. Missed. Worked the lever. Fired again. The shadow fell. Samuel was running for the tree line, the satchel clutched to his chest. Caleb followed, walking backward, firing to keep the attackers pinned. They made it to the trees, dove into cover. Behind them the cabin was fully ablaze now, flames reaching toward the stars, the heat so intense Caleb could feel it on his back even 30 yards away. He watched it burn. 15 years of life. The books, the furniture, the medical supplies, everything Anna had touched, everything Mary had known, all of it ash. Samuel touched his shoulder. "Signed." "No," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "We don't run. We regroup." He turned to look at the men still surrounding the burning cabin. 6 left by his count, maybe 7 if the one he had shot from the roof was still mobile. "Drummond wants the land fine, but he's going to pay for every inch in blood." They melted back into the trees. Behind them the cabin collapsed in on itself with a roar of flame and falling timber. The sound echoed across the valley, a funeral bell for the life Caleb had tried to build. But he was not dead yet. And neither, he hoped, was Grace. Grace rode into chaos. She saw the smoke from 5 miles out, a pillar of black against the dawn sky. Her heart, which had been beating normally, suddenly accelerated into something that felt like panic. She pushed the mare harder, ignoring the animal's fatigue. 4 days of hard travel, Cheyenne and back. The documents were in her saddlebag, sealed in oilcloth to protect them from weather. She had done everything right. Gotten the original water rights filing from Patterson, who had remembered Caleb and the $50 tip and had been happy to help. Retrieved the deed verification from the surveyor's office. Even obtained a notarized statement from a federal land officer confirming the legitimacy of Caleb's claim. Legal armor. Unbreachable. Except she was riding toward smoke that suggested legal protections had arrived too late. The cabin came into view, or what was left of it. The walls were still standing barely, but the roof was gone. Everything inside was blackened char. The snow around the structure was melted in a wide radius, the ground scorched. Grace dismounted before the mare had fully stopped. "Caleb." No answer, just the settling creak of burned timber and the whisper of wind through the ruins. "Caleb." She ran toward the cabin, then stopped. Bodies. 3 of them laid out in the snow. Dead men she did not recognize, their weapons still clutched in stiff hands. Not Caleb. None of them were Caleb. A whistle. 3 short bursts. From the tree line. Grace spun. Caleb emerged from the pines, alive, upright, blood on his shirt, but moving under his own power. Samuel was beside him, looking haggard but unhurt. Relief flooded through Grace so powerfully she nearly collapsed. Instead, she ran. Caleb met her halfway. She hit him hard enough to make him grunt, her arms wrapping around his chest, her face pressed against his shoulder. He smelled like smoke and sweat and blood, and Grace did not care. "You're alive," she said into his shirt. "So are you." His arms came up slowly as though he was not sure of the gesture. Then they tightened, holding her with a strength that spoke of relief that matched her own. "I thought they got you. When you didn't come back yesterday, I thought—" "The stage broke an axle outside Laramie. We were delayed 8 hours. Grace pulled back, looked up at his face. Blood from a cut above his eye had dried in a dark line down his cheek. "What happened?" "Drummond sent men. 7 of them. Burned us out." Caleb gestured to the cabin. "We got the legal documents out. Most of the weapons. Nothing else." Grace opened her saddlebag, pulled out the oilcloth packet. "I got the originals, the real water rights filing, the deed verification, and a statement from the Federal Land Office confirming your claim is legitimate and properly filed." Caleb took the packet, opened it, stared at the documents inside with an expression Grace could not quite read. "You did it," he said quietly. "We're partners. I did my part." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something in his face shifted. "Yes, you did." Samuel cleared his throat pointedly, signed. Caleb nodded. "He's right. We can't stay here. Drummond will send more men, maybe a dozen next time. We need to move to defensible ground." "Where?" "The mining camp. Samuel's camp. It's in a narrow canyon with only one approach, easier to defend, and we'll have the miners to help." They gathered what they could salvage from the ruins. Not much. Some ammunition that had survived the fire, a few tools. The Winchester scorched but functional. Grace noticed Caleb slip something into his pocket. A locket. Gold tarnished but intact. "Anna's?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Only thing I have left of her and Mary." He looked at the ruins one more time. 15 years. Gone in one night. "The land is still yours. The legal claim is solid." "Legal claim doesn't stop bullets, Grace." "No, but it changes the game. Drummond can't just kill us and take the land. Not now. Not with federal documentation proving ownership." She mounted her horse, feeling the exhaustion of 4 days' travel catch up with her all at once. "Now he has to either buy us out or prove we're dead in a way that doesn't implicate him." Caleb mounted his own horse. "That just means he'll be more careful about the killing." They rode toward the mining camp, leaving the burned cabin behind. Grace looked back once. In the morning light, the ruins looked small, insignificant. Just another failed homestead in a territory full of them. But she knew it was more than that. It was Caleb's attempt to build something good from the ashes of his guilt, and Drummond had burned it to punish him for telling the truth 15 years ago. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said as they rode. "Yes." "The hospital fire, the one Drummond blames you for, what really happened?" Caleb was silent for so long Grace thought he would not answer. Then, without looking at her, he began to speak. 1863, June. I was stationed at a field hospital outside Fredericksburg. 23 patients, 2 nurses. My job was perimeter security. Simple. Keep watch. Make sure no raiders got close enough to threaten the wounded. He paused, adjusted his grip on the reins. My daughter Mary was 5 years old. She got sick, scarlet fever. Anna sent word, begged me to come home, said Mary was asking for me, that she might not survive. Grace said nothing, just listened. I left my post, rode 3 hours to Chattanooga, got there just as Mary died. She opened her eyes, saw me, said, "Papa, I waited for you." And then she was gone. The words came out flat, empty. The tone of a man who had told himself this story so many times it had lost emotional color. I stayed long enough to bury her. 6 hours total that I was gone. When I got back to the hospital, it was burning. Confederate raiders. They'd killed everyone. Patients who couldn't move, they shot in their beds. The nurses, His jaw tightened. They didn't die quickly. Drummond's brother, Jonathan Drummond. Good man. Better than Magnus ever was. He was the field surgeon. They found his body covering a wounded soldier still trying to protect him, even as the fire took them both. Caleb's horse stumbled slightly. He steadied it, eyes still fixed on the trail ahead. We caught the raiders 3 days later, 20 of them, young, scared, starving. The kind of boys the Confederacy scraped from the bottom of the barrel when they ran out of real soldiers. What did Drummond do? Lined them up, made them kneel, shot each one in the back of the head. Caleb's voice never changed. Still flat, still empty. I was the ranking officer after Jonathan died. I could have stopped it, should have stopped it. They were prisoners of war. We had rules, courts martial, trials. But you didn't stop it. No, I watched 20 boys die because I was too broken to care about rules anymore. I had just buried my daughter. Drummond had just lost his brother. The war had taken everything from both of us, so I let him have his revenge. Then why did you testify against him? Because 2 years later, after the war ended, after I had time to think about what we'd done, I realized that letting 20 boys die to ease our grief didn't bring Jonathan or Mary back. It just made us murderers. Caleb finally looked at her. So I told the truth, and Drummond has wanted me dead ever since. Grace absorbed this. But you saved one. You mentioned in your journal that one survived. Caleb's eyebrows rose. You read my journal. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. But there was no anger in his voice, just resignation. Yes, I saved one. Thomas Whitfield, 17 years old, from Georgia, had a wife and a baby daughter. I hid him in a supply wagon, smuggled him south, let him go. Why? Because saving one life doesn't balance 20 deaths, but it's something. It's not nothing. He turned back to the trail. That's the truth, Grace. I'm not a hero. I'm a coward who watched atrocities happen and did nothing. The only good thing I've done in my entire life is let one boy live. Grace thought about this, about the complexity of guilt and redemption, about her mother dying in the fire while saving her and her father blaming Grace for that death every day since. My mother saved me, Grace said. My father never forgave me for letting her. He said I should have died instead, that I wasn't worth her sacrifice. She looked at Caleb. But I am. I'm worth it because I chose to keep living, to keep standing, to make her sacrifice mean something by refusing to be the worthless thing my father said I was. She reached across the space between their horses, took his hand. You're not a coward, Caleb. You're a man who made a terrible choice in a moment of unbearable grief, and you've spent 15 years punishing yourself for it. That's not cowardice. That's just human. Caleb looked at their joined hands. His thumb moved barely across her knuckles. I don't deserve absolution, he said. I'm not offering absolution. I'm offering partnership. We both carry our dead. The question is whether we'll let them bury us alive or whether we'll keep standing and fight for something better. They rode in silence after that. But Caleb did not let go of her hand. The mining camp appeared ahead, a collection of rough structures huddled in a narrow canyon. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Men looked up as they approached, hands moving to weapons, then relaxing as they recognized Samuel. 15 miners. Rough men hardened by labor and weather, but their eyes were steady. Good men, as Samuel had said. One stepped forward. Irish by his accent, with red hair and a face full of scars from rockfalls and explosions. Heard your cabin burned, he said to Caleb. Heard you killed 3 of Drummond's boys. True on both counts. The Irishman grinned. Then you'll be wanting help with the rest of them, I expect. Caleb dismounted. I can't pay you. I can't promise you'll survive. All I can offer is the knowledge that if Drummond takes this mountain, he'll own your water rights and charge you prices that will drive every one of you out within a year. The miners looked at each other. Then one by one they nodded. We're with you, the Irishman said. Name's Patrick, by the way, and this," he gestured to the others, "is the ugliest, meanest collection of Irish Scots Germans and one extremely angry Chinaman you'll ever meet. We'll hold the line." Caleb shook his hand. "Then we'd better start fortifying. Drummond will come with everything he has, and when he does, we need to be ready." The canyon was a natural fortress, 30 yards wide at the mouth, narrowing to 15 at the back, where the miners had carved their claims into the rock face. Steep walls on either side, too sheer to climb without ropes and time. One way in, one way out. Caleb stood at the entrance, studying the approaches with the eye of a man who had defended worse positions with fewer men. Beside him, Patrick was scratching diagrams in the dirt with a stick. "We put the shooters here and here," the Irishman said, marking positions on the canyon walls. "Overlapping fields of fire. Anyone coming through that mouth gets hit from 3 angles." "Good. What about supplies?" "Water from the spring at the back. Food for maybe 2 weeks if we ration. Ammunition." Patrick grimaced. "That's our weakness. Most of the boys have hunting rifles, maybe 20 rounds each. Not exactly an army's worth." Caleb did the math. 15 miners, 20 rounds each. 300 total. Plus his own ammunition, maybe another 150. 450 rounds against however many men Drummond could hire. Not good odds, but not impossible either. Grace approached carrying a bucket of water from the spring. She had changed into men's work clothes, boots and trousers, and a heavy shirt, her hair tied back. The transformation was striking. Without the dresses and shawl, without the attempt to hide the scar, she looked like what she was becoming, a fighter. "The miners' families," she said. "Where are they?" "Down in Bitter Creek. Boarding houses mostly." Patrick looked uncomfortable. "We're not family men up here. This is bachelor work. Too dangerous." "So if Drummond burns this camp, no one loses anything but wages and shelter." "That's about the size of it, miss." Grace set down the bucket. "Then we need to make this about more than just defending Caleb's claim. We need to make it about principle, about standing up to a man who thinks he can buy or burn anything he wants." Caleb looked at her. "What are you thinking?" "Legal pressure. We have the documents proving your claim is legitimate. If we can get them to a federal authority before Drummond attacks, he can't just kill us and pretend it was a property dispute. He'd be facing federal murder charges. The nearest federal marshal is in Cheyenne. That's 3 days' ride. Then we send someone, fast horse, hard ride, get the documents to the marshal, get a federal injunction against Drummond interfering with your claim." Patrick whistled low. "That's bold, but it means we're down 1 gun while the rider is gone." "I'll go," Grace said. "No." Caleb's response was immediate. "You just got back from 4 days on the road. You're exhausted. And if Drummond has scouts watching the trails, they'll stop you." "Then who?" Samuel stepped forward. Signed rapidly. Caleb shook his head. "I need you here. You're the best shot we have besides me." Samuel signed again more emphatically. Caleb read the signs, his face darkening. Finally he nodded. "All right. But you take the back trail. No main roads. And if you see anyone following you, ditch the documents and run. Your life is worth more than paper." Samuel clasped Caleb's shoulder once, then moved to prepare his horse. "When will Drummond come?" Patrick asked. Caleb looked at the sky. Clear, cold, the kind of weather that would hold for days. "Soon. He knows we're grouped here. He knows he burned my cabin. He'll want to press the advantage while we're still disorganized." "How many men do you think he'll bring?" "At least 20. Maybe 30 if he's serious about ending this." Caleb turned to the miners. "I need to know now. If you want to leave, no one will judge you. This isn't your fight." The miners looked at each other. Then a German miner built like a bear with hands the size of dinner plates spoke up. "Drummond's men killed Patrick's cousin last year, claimed dispute, shot him in the back and called it self-defense." Patrick nodded grimly. "Tom O'Brien, good lad, never hurt nobody. They murdered him for 5 acres of played-out ground." "Drummond's been squeezing us for years," another miner added. Chinese, his English accented but clear. "Every year water prices go up. Every year he buys more claims. He wants to own everything. We stay and fight. One by one the miners affirmed their commitment. 15 men, none of them soldiers, all of them willing to risk death for a principle that went beyond property. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. He had lived alone for so long, had believed for 15 years that isolation was penance and companionship was something he did not deserve. But these men were choosing to stand with him. And Grace, who had every reason to run, was loading a rifle with hands that no longer shook. "All right then," Caleb said. "We fortify, we prepare, and when they come, we make them pay for every inch." The attack came at dawn 2 days later. Caleb was on watch, standing at the canyon mouth with the Winchester cradled in his arms when he saw the first riders. They came from the tree line a quarter-mile out, materializing from the pre-dawn gray like ghosts taking solid form. He counted. 23, all mounted, all armed. "Positions!" Caleb's shout echoed through the camp. The miners scrambled, moving to the defensive positions they had drilled for 2 days, rocks piled for cover, rifle rests carved into the canyon walls, overlapping fields of fire. Grace took her position beside Caleb, the shotgun loaded and ready. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. The riders stopped at 200 yards. A man dismounted, walked forward alone. He carried a white flag, but his other hand rested on the revolver at his hip. Cole Strand. Caleb recognized him from the description Samuel had brought back from Bitter Creek. Drummond's best gun. Professional. Dangerous. But apparently still clinging to some vestige of civilized rules if he was approaching under truce. "Blackwood." Strand's voice carried easily across the distance. "Drummond wants to talk. Then let him come himself instead of sending hired killers." "He's here." Strand gestured back toward the riders. A carriage had appeared, pulled by 2 horses far more elegant than the rough terrain warranted. The door opened. Magnus Drummond stepped out. Caleb felt his breath catch. 15 years. 15 years since he had seen the man who had once been closer than a brother. Drummond had aged silver in his hair, now lines around his eyes, but he still stood straight, still moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his right to command. Drummond walked forward until he stood beside Strand 50 yards from the canyon mouth, close enough to talk, far enough to run if shooting started. "Caleb." Drummond's voice was exactly as Caleb remembered, cultured, controlled, the voice of an officer who expected to be obeyed. "It's been a long time. Not long enough. I see you've made friends. 15 miners and—" Drummond's eyes found Grace. "Harper's ugly daughter. The consolation prize. Must be lonely up here if you're settling for damaged goods." Grace's hand tightened on the shotgun, but she did not rise to the bait. Caleb took a step forward. "Say what you came to say, Magnus, then leave before I put a bullet in you for old time's sake. I came to offer you a deal. One last chance before this gets ugly." Drummond pulled a document from his coat. "I'll buy your claim. Fair price. $10,000. Enough to start over anywhere you want. You sign this, take the money, and ride out. Today. And if I refuse, then I take the land anyway. But instead of $10,000, you get a grave. Your choice." Caleb considered the offer. 10,000 was generous, more than the land was worth by any honest assessment. Drummond was trying to make this look legitimate, trying to avoid the messiness of outright murder. "No." Drummond's face hardened. "Be reasonable, Caleb. You're outnumbered, outgunned. You have 15 miners with squirrel rifles against 23 professional guns. You can't win this." "Maybe not, but I can make you pay for every inch. And while you're wasting time and money trying to kill me, the federal marshal in Cheyenne is getting a full report about your forged land documents and your attempts at intimidation and murder." Drummond went very still. "What are you talking about?" Grace spoke up, her voice clear and strong. "We have the original water rights filing, the real one, not the forgery you planted in the territorial office. We have federal documentation proving Caleb's claim is legitimate, and we have a courier who's already halfway to Cheyenne with copies of everything." It was a bluff. Samuel had the documents, but whether he had made it to Cheyenne yet was uncertain, but Drummond did not know that. "You're lying." "Am I? Then go ahead and kill us. See what happens when a federal marshal shows up asking why a senator ordered the murder of a legitimate landowner." Grace smiled, and there was nothing gentle in it. "You can't just burn this away, Senator. This time the law is watching." Drummond's jaw worked. He looked at Strand. "Is this true? Did we have someone watching the trails?" "We had 3 scouts, but—" Strand looked uncomfortable. "One of them reported seeing a black man on the back trail 3 days ago, riding hard. We couldn't intercept without leaving the main group." Drummond closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were cold. "You should have killed him." "You didn't authorize lethal force against scouts." "I'm authorizing it now." Drummond turned back to Caleb. "You want to make this hard, fine. We'll do it the hard way. But understand this. When I'm done, there won't be enough of you left to bury." He walked back to the carriage. Got in. The door slammed. Strand looked at Caleb one more time. There was something in his expression. Regret, maybe, or just professional respect for an opponent who was about to die well. Then he turned and walked back to his men. "Here it comes," Caleb said quietly. He raised his voice. "Everyone ready? They're going to charge. Make every shot count." The hired guns formed a line. 23 men, all armed with rifles or revolvers. Drummond's carriage retreated to a safe distance. Strand raised his hand, dropped it. The charge began. 23 riders spurring their horses forward, rifles raised, screaming as they came. The sound was enormous, the thunder of hooves mixing with war cries designed to intimidate and demoralize. "Hold," Caleb shouted. "Wait for my signal." The distance closed. 200 yards, 175, 150. Hold, 125, 100. Close enough now that Caleb could see individual faces. Young men, most of them. Doing this for money, not conviction. Fire. The canyon erupted. 15 miners shooting from cover, all firing at once. The overlapping fields of fire that Patrick had designed turned the canyon mouth into a killing ground. 4 riders went down in the first volley. Horses screamed, men fell. The charge faltered. "Reload!" Caleb worked the lever on his Winchester, fired, worked the lever again. Beside him, Grace was methodical with the shotgun, firing, reloading, firing again. No wasted motion, no panic. A second volley. 3 more riders fell. The charge broke. The surviving guns wheeled their horses, retreating out of range. They left 7 men on the ground. Some were moving, some were not. Patrick appeared at Caleb's elbow, grinning despite the blood running from a gash on his forehead. They weren't expecting that, were they? They'll try again, and next time they'll be smarter about it. Caleb scanned the enemy position. 16 guns left. Still outnumbered, but the odds were better now. Grace was reloading the shotgun, her hands steady. Caleb noticed a burn mark on her collar where a bullet had come close. Too close. "You all right?" "Fine." She snapped the shotgun closed. "How's our ammunition?" "We just used maybe 100 rounds. 300 left, give or take." "And they have, what, several hundred each?" "At least." Grace looked at the dead men in the snow. "We can't win a war of attrition." "No, but we don't have to. We just have to survive until Samuel gets back with federal help. And if he doesn't make it—" Caleb met her eyes. "Then we make our stand here and hope it means something." The second attack came an hour later. This time they did not charge. Instead, the hired guns spread out, taking cover behind rocks and trees, laying down, suppressing fire, while others tried to advance by inches. It was professional, methodical, exactly what Caleb would have done. The miners returned fire, but the enemy had learned. They were using cover, moving in teams, forcing the defenders to expose themselves to get clear shots. A miner named Klaus took a bullet through the shoulder. He went down cursing and German blood soaking his shirt. Grace was there immediately, dragging him back, applying pressure to the wound. "How bad?" Caleb asked. "Missed the artery. He'll live if we can keep the wound clean." Grace was already working her grandfather's medical knowledge, combining with Caleb's field medicine. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, packed it with cloth torn from Klaus's own shirt. The firing continued. Caleb counted rounds in his head. 250 left, maybe less. They could not sustain this. As if reading his thoughts, Patrick crawled over. We're running low. Another hour of this and we'll be throwing rocks. Pull everyone back to the second position, the narrow point. Force them to come at us single file. That means giving up the mouth of the canyon. I know, but we can't defend a wide front with 15 men. We consolidate, make them funnel into a kill zone. Patrick nodded and passed the word. The miners fell back in stages, covering each other, leaving the canyon mouth empty. The hired guns noticed. They advanced cautious, expecting a trap. When they reached the abandoned positions without taking fire, they grew bolder. 12 men entered the canyon. Caleb waited until they were committed too far in to retreat quickly. Then he gave the signal. The miners opened fire from both sides, shooting down from the canyon walls. The guns had nowhere to hide. The canyon became an echo chamber of gunfire and screams. 6 men went down in the first 5 seconds. The others ran scrambling back toward the mouth, some of them throwing down their weapons in their panic to escape. When the smoke cleared, 10 men lay dead or dying in the canyon. The hired guns had lost 17 total. 6 remained, plus Drummond, plus Strand. "Cease fire!" Strand's voice echoed across the killing ground. "Cease fire, goddammit!" The shooting stopped. In the terrible silence that followed, Caleb could hear the moans of the wounded. Strand appeared at the canyon mouth, hands raised. "I want to collect our wounded." Caleb looked at the men lying in the snow. Some were beyond help, but 3 or 4 might survive if they got medical attention. "Grace," he said quietly, "your call. They're wounded. Do we let them die or show mercy?" Grace looked at the men, at their pain. She thought about her mother who had run into fire to save her, about the difference between justice and cruelty. "Let them collect their wounded," she said. "But they come unarmed, and they have 5 minutes." Caleb shouted the terms. Strand agreed. 4 men came forward, no weapons, moving quickly to gather their injured comrades. They worked in silence, faces pale, hands shaking. When they were done, they carried the wounded back. The dead they left. Strand paused at the canyon mouth one last time. He looked at Caleb, then at Grace. "You fight well," he said, "both of you. Under different circumstances, I'd be proud to have you on my side." "But these aren't different circumstances," Caleb replied. "No, they're not." Strand turned to go, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I think Drummond is wrong. About the land, about you, about all of it. But I took his money and I finish what I start." He walked away. Grace watched him go. "He's going to come back, isn't he? One more time?" "Yes, but now it's personal for him. It's not about money anymore. It's about pride, and pride makes men stupid." The final attack came at dusk. Not a charge, not a methodical advance. Just Cole Strand walking toward the canyon alone, his hands empty, his face set. Caleb stepped out to meet him. "It's done," Strand said when they were 10 feet apart. "Drummond rode back to Cheyenne an hour ago. Said if I wanted to keep killing miners over a worthless piece of ground, I could do it on my own conscience." "So you're leaving?" "No, I'm making you an offer." Strand pulled off his gun belt, let it fall. "Single combat. You and me. Winner takes all. You win, my men leave, and you keep the land. I win, you sign the deed over and leave Wyoming forever." Caleb studied him. "Why?" "Because 17 men are dead, and I'm tired of killing people who don't deserve it. This way it ends clean, one way or another. And if I refuse, then I gather what's left of my men, and we come back with twice as many, and next time we don't stop until everyone in this canyon is dead, including her." He nodded toward Grace. Caleb felt the weight of the decision. Accept the dual, risk everything on his own skill. Refuse, guarantee more bloodshed. Grace appeared at his shoulder. "Don't do this. It's a trick." "Maybe. Or maybe he's just trying to end it with some shred of honor intact." Caleb looked at Strand. "Your men. They'll honor the outcome." "They will. I've already told them. If you kill me, they ride out and don't come back." Caleb unbuckled his own gun belt, handed it to Grace. "If I lose you, take the documents and run. Get to Cheyenne. Don't look back." Caleb, please. He touched her face briefly. Trust me. He turned back to Strand. All right, let's finish this. They faced each other in the snow. No guns, just hands and fists, and the accumulated violence of 2 lifetimes spent learning how to hurt and kill. Strand moved first, fast for a big man closing the distance with a punch aimed at Caleb's jaw. Caleb slipped it, countered with a strike to Strand's ribs, felt bone beneath the impact. They traded blows. Brutal, efficient, neither man wasting energy on showmanship. This was not a boxing match. This was war condensed into human scale. Strand got through Caleb's guard, landed a fist that split his eyebrow. Blood poured into Caleb's eye. He responded with a knee to Strand's stomach that folded the younger man double. They grappled, fell into the snow, rolled each trying for position. Strand was stronger, but Caleb was older, meaner, willing to gouge and bite and use every dirty trick learned in 52 years of survival. Caleb got his arm around Strand's throat, began to squeeze. Strand thrashed, clawing at Caleb's face, but the hold was locked in. "Yield," Caleb rasped. Strand's struggles weakened. His hand tapped against Caleb's arm. 3 times. The universal signal. Caleb released him, stood swaying. Every part of him hurt. Strand lay in the snow gasping. When he could speak, he said, "You won." "I won." Strand got to his feet, picked up his gun belt, turned to the canyon where his remaining men were watching. "It's over," he shouted. "Mount up. We're leaving." The hired guns hesitated, then obeyed. Within minutes they were gone, riding back toward Bitter Creek, leaving their dead behind. Grace ran to Caleb. "You're bleeding." "I'm alive. That's what matters." He wiped blood from his eye. "Is it over? Is it really over?" The answer came 6 days later. Samuel returned with a U.S. Marshal and 6 federal deputies. They brought news. Magnus Drummond had been arrested in Cheyenne on charges of fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The forged land documents had been discovered during a federal investigation. Drummond's political protection had evaporated. He was facing trial. The land was secure, the water rights confirmed. Caleb Blackwood was the legal owner of the mountain, and no one could take that from him. That night the miners celebrated. Whiskey appeared from hidden stores. Someone produced a fiddle. The narrow canyon filled with music and laughter and the sound of men who had survived something they had not expected to. Caleb sat apart watching. His body ached from the fight with Strand. His mind ached from 15 years of isolation finally ending. Grace found him, sat beside him without speaking, just her presence solid and real. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "Now we rebuild. The cabin, the life, everything Drummond tried to burn. Caleb looked at her. "If you'll stay, I know I didn't give you much choice when you arrived. Your father sold you to pay a debt. That contract is void. You're free to go anywhere you want. I'll give you money, help you start over. Anywhere but here." Grace was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you remember what you said the first night about gold being soft and useless up here?" "I remember. You said iron survives, that I had an iron scar." She touched the mark on her neck. "I've spent my whole life being told this scar made me worthless, that I was the ugly daughter, the burden, the mistake." She turned to face him fully. "But you looked at this scar and saw strength. You looked at me and saw a partner, not property. For the first time in my life, someone saw me as valuable, as capable, as worth keeping. You are all those things. Then ask me properly, not as payment for a debt, not as a convenience. Ask me as a man asking a woman knowing she has every right to refuse." Caleb's breath caught. He had not let himself hope for this, had not believed he deserved this. He stood, held out his hand. Grace took it, let him pull her to her feet. "Grace Harper," Caleb said, and his voice was rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I'm 52 years old. I have a past full of ghosts. I'll never be easy to love. But if you'll have me, I promise to be your partner, not your owner. To stand with you, not above you. to honor the strength that kept you standing when the world told you to kneel." He pulled the locket from his pocket, Anna's locket, opened it. Inside was a curl of dark hair and a small photograph, faded but still visible. "This was my wife's and my daughter's. I loved them more than breathing. But they're gone. And you." He closed the locket, held it out to Grace. "You're here. You're real. You're iron and fire and everything I didn't know I needed." He dropped to one knee in the snow. "Marry me, not because of debt or obligation, but because I choose you, and I'm asking you to choose me back." Grace looked at him, at this man who had been broken by war and loss and 15 years of isolation, who had taught her to shoot and fight and stand, who had looked at her scar and seen beauty. "Yes," she said. Caleb stood, started to put the locket around her neck. Grace stopped him. "No, that's Anna's. I don't want to replace her. I want you to keep it. Remember her. She deserves that." Instead, Grace pulled off her own locket, her mother's, opened it. "We each carry our dead," she said. "Let's carry them together." She fastened her mother's locket around Caleb's neck. He fastened Anna's around hers, and then he kissed her there in the snow with the miners cheering and the mountain standing witness. It was not the first kiss for either of them, but it was the first kiss that tasted like choice rather than necessity, like beginning rather than ending. When they pulled apart, Grace was smiling. "When? Tomorrow, if you're sure." "I'm sure." They were married the next day by the U.S. Marshal, who happened to be a former judge and was willing to perform the ceremony. The miners stood witness. Samuel signed the marriage certificate with his mark. Grace wore men's trousers and Caleb's spare shirt because all her dresses had burned in the cabin. Caleb wore the same blood-stained buckskin he'd been wearing for a week. It was not elegant, but it was real. When the marshal asked Caleb to speak his vows, Caleb looked at Grace and said, "I vow to be your partner, not your owner, to stand with you, not above you, to see your strength and never ask you to be smaller to make me feel larger." Grace responded, "I vow to be your iron, not your burden, to fight beside you, not behind you, to carry our dead together and build something living from the ashes." They exchanged simple silver bands that Patrick had forged from ore, still rough but solid. The marshal pronounced them married. 2 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived from Cheyenne. It was from Cole Strand, now wearing a federal marshal's badge. Caleb read it aloud to Grace by the fire. Drummond was arrested 3 days after he returned to Cheyenne. Federal marshals had been investigating him for months. The forged documents were just the beginning. Bribery, intimidation, murder for hire. The trial lasted 5 days. He was convicted on all counts, 5 years in federal prison. Grace looked up from her sewing. "Did he say anything at the trial?" Caleb scanned further down the page. His voice caught. "Strand says Drummond asked to speak before sentencing." He paused, reading silently for a moment. "What did he say?" Grace asked. "He told the judge," Caleb's voice was rough, "I spent 15 years hating the wrong man. Caleb Blackwood didn't kill my brother. War killed my brother. I killed my brother by not being there when it mattered, and I let revenge poison everything that came after. Jonathan would have been ashamed of what I became." Grace set down her needle. "That's not absolution." "No, but it's acknowledgement." Caleb folded the letter carefully. "Strand says Drummond asked him to deliver a message, to tell me that Jonathan would have forgiven us both, that brothers fight but family endures. And what do you think?" Caleb stared into the fire for a long moment. "I think Magnus Drummond and I were both broken by the war. The difference is, I found a reason to keep living." He reached for Grace's hand. "He found a reason to keep hating. Do you forgive him?" "I don't know if I can forgive him, but I can understand him. That's enough." Grace squeezed his hand. "Then let it go. We have too much life ahead to carry ghosts." The letter went into the fire. They watched it burn together, the past turning to ash, making room for what came next. That night they lay together in Samuel's cabin, the only structure with a real bed. Outside, the mountain was silent. The siege was over. The land was secure. The future was uncertain but possible. "Caleb," Grace whispered in the darkness, "tell me about Anna, about Mary. I want to know them." And so he did. He told her about Anna's laugh, about Mary's drawings, about the life he had lost. He cried for the first time in 15 years, and Grace held him while he did. When he was done, she told him about her mother, about the fire, about the locket and the words inside it. They shared their grief and found it lighter for the sharing. And in the morning, they began to build. The years passed. In 1879, Caleb and Grace rebuilt the cabin. Larger this time, room for the children they knew would come. In 1880, their son was born. They named him Samuel after the man who had stood with them when the world burned. In 1882, their daughter arrived, Anna Grace, named for both the women who had shaped them. The mining camp grew into a town, Blackwood Ridge. Population 50, then 100, then 300. Grace opened a school. Caleb, to his surprise, was elected mayor. Patrick became the first sheriff of Blackwood Ridge, his booming Irish laugh a fixture at town meetings for 30 years. Klaus, the German miner who had taken a bullet through the shoulder, married a widow from Laramie and raised 4 children in the house he built with one arm still weak from the wound. The Chinese miner, whose name the others had mangled into Charlie, opened a restaurant that stood for 50 years, serving dumplings that drew travelers from as far as Denver. Of the 15 miners who had stood at the canyon mouth that winter day in 1879, 12 survived the siege. All 12 stayed in Blackwood Ridge, building the town that grew from violence into peace. Their children grew up learning to read in Grace's schoolhouse. Their grandchildren would remember the winter when their grandfathers stood against an army and won. The coal beneath the mountain was never mined. Caleb and Grace decided together that some wealth was not worth the cost. They leased water rights to the miners at fair prices, made enough to live well, but not richly. Magnus Drummond was convicted, 5 years in federal prison. When he was released, he was a broken man. He died in 1890 alone, his fortune spent on legal fees and failed appeals. Cole Strand became a federal marshal. He visited Blackwood Ridge once years later to pay his respects. Caleb shook his hand. They did not become friends, but they achieved something rarer: mutual respect between former enemies. Warren Harper died in 1885, found frozen in a snowdrift outside a Bitter Creek saloon. He was 53 years old. The town buried him in a pauper's grave. Grace learned of his death 3 weeks later from a letter delivered by the territorial mail. She read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the stove. "Do you want to go to the grave?" Caleb asked. Grace shook her head. "He was my father by blood, but he stopped being my parent the night he sold me. I mourned that loss a long time ago." She never spoke of him again. Rosalind married a banker from Cheyenne in 1883. The marriage lasted 6 months before he left her for a younger woman. She returned to Bitter Creek and lived there until her death in 1915. Bitter and alone, still beautiful, but no longer young enough for beauty to matter. Grace never saw her sister again. She did not mourn that loss either. Samuel Bridger lived until 1895. He died quietly in his sleep, surrounded by the miners he had led and the family who loved him. At his funeral, Caleb spoke the eulogy in signs, a language he had learned so they could talk in the silence. In 1900, young Samuel Blackwood left to study mining engineering in Denver. He returned 5 years later, married with a son of his own, Thomas. Anna Grace became a doctor, the first female physician in Wyoming Territory. She married another doctor and moved to Cheyenne, where she ran a clinic for those who could not afford care elsewhere. In 1918, Grace died, peacefully, in her sleep. She was 66 years old. Caleb buried her on the mountain in the place where the cabin had stood, the place where she had first proven she was iron. The headstone read, "Grace Blackwood, 1852 to 1918. She taught me that scars are not weakness, but proof of strength." Caleb lived another 2 years, long enough to meet 3 grandchildren, long enough to tell the stories, long enough to pass the land to Samuel, who promised to keep it in the family. And now, in June of 1920, 94 years old and fading, Caleb Blackwood sat in his chair and finished the story he had started. Thomas, 16, listened with eyes wide. "So grandmother really shot a man?" the boy asked. "3 men, Caleb corrected. "And she saved my life more than once, with bullets and with wisdom." "Do you miss her?" "Every day. But she left me something better than memories. She left me purpose." Caleb leaned forward. "Thomas, your Aunt Sarah wants to marry a man your family doesn't approve of. They say he's not good enough, that he has no standing. Father says he's a fortune hunter. Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. That's not the point." Caleb reached out, took Thomas's hand. "The point is that your aunt loves him, and she's willing to stand against her whole family to choose him. That takes courage. But what if she's wrong? Then she'll learn from it and choose differently next time. But if she doesn't try, if she spends her life being what other people want her to be instead of what she wants to be, she'll die having never really lived." Caleb stood, moved to the window. Outside, the mountain stood eternal. "Your great-grandmother taught me something," he said. "Real love doesn't ask permission. It just is. And the bravest thing you can do is stand up and say, 'This is who I am. This is what I choose.' Even when everyone tells you you're wrong." "What if I fail? What if I choose wrong?" Caleb turned back. "Then you stand up and try again. That's all any of us can do. Fall down 7 times, stand up 8. Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll tell Aunt Sarah you support her decision." "Good boy." Thomas stood to leave, then paused. "Grandfather, when you die, what do you want people to remember?" Caleb considered. "I want them to remember that I failed, that I made terrible choices, that I carried guilt for things I did and didn't do, and that none of that stopped me from trying every day to be a better man than I was the day before." He smiled. "And I want them to remember that the unwanted daughter became the queen of the valley, that scars don't make you broken, that iron survives, and that sometimes the greatest love stories start with the people everyone else threw away." Thomas left. Caleb sat back in his chair. He was tired. So very tired. He pulled out the locket, Grace's mother's locket, the one she had given him on their wedding night. Inside was the curl of hair and the faded words, "Strength is choosing to stand when they expect you to kneel." "I stood, love," he whispered to the empty room. "Every day I stood, because you taught me how." That night Caleb Blackwood died in his sleep, 94 years old. He died holding the photograph of Grace, the one from their wedding day, where her scar was visible and she was smiling. They buried him next to her on the mountain. The town of Blackwood Ridge, now home to 8,000 people, shut down for the funeral. 3 generations of miners and their families came to pay respects. Thomas Blackwood, now a young man, stood at the grave and spoke. "My grandfather taught me that scars don't make you broken," he said. "They make you iron. And the ugly daughter he married became the strongest woman I never met. But I know her through him, through the way he loved her, through the way he stood for what he believed, even when it cost him everything." He looked at the mountains. "This is their legacy, not the land, not the money, but the principle that you stand for what's right even when it's hard, that you choose love over convenience, that you keep standing no matter how many times the world knocks you down." Years later, in the 1960s, Thomas would tell this story to his own grandchildren. The town of Blackwood Ridge would still stand, though the mines had long since played out. The mountain would still provide water to the valley below, sold at fair prices, just as Caleb and Grace had decreed. And on the grave markers, worn by weather but still legible, the words would remain, "Caleb Blackwood, 1826 to 1920. He learned that redemption is not a destination, but a daily choice. Grace Blackwood, 1852 to 1918, the Iron Queen. She taught us all to stand. 2 people who had been thrown away by the world, who had found each other in fire and violence and necessity, who had chosen every day to be partners, to stand together, to build something that outlasted empires. Their story became legend, but the truth was simpler and more powerful than any legend. They had stood, and in standing they had won.